Have you ever wondered what are the most disturbing albums ever created? Not just the edgy or offensive one, but those who really stick with you after you stop listening to them. This video is split into 5 different layers, and with each layer the themes of the albums are getting more darker and more disturbing. But before we dive in, a quick heads up. I really tried my best to include different types of music, and I also try my best to not repeat certain topics all over again, so the iceberg doesn't end up too bloated. It's the same approach we had while covering disturbing songs, album covers and music videos. And I think that every album deserves its right on this chart. And also to note, I will start each layer with a small explanation about what the layer is actually about, for you to have a better context and better feeling of what we are getting into. Because skipping ahead will probably leave you just very confused and disturbed at the same time. Now I'm Snorky, and there is only one question left. Do you dare to explore the most disturbing albums ever created? Now layer 1 is about more popular titles you probably already know, but they are still dark and even darker if you know their backstories. Alice in Chains' Jar of Flies. Starting this layer with one of the most quiet but devastating albums on this layer. The band recorded this album when they were back from touring, and their lives at that point were a complete mess. Because of the constant touring and the substance abuse, they were burnt out but also broke. In fact, so broke they actually moved into the studio to record their next album because they didn't have a place to stay. And at that time everybody saw that Lenny at the time was slipping into addiction, but nobody could actually help him. And when you listen to Lenny's voice on this record, it sounds very tired and raw, like a voice of somebody who is already giving up. The key track here is probably Nutshell. Where Lane is simply talking about how he doesn't connect with people anymore, and even if he is surrounded by people, he feels very lonely. And if you know how his story ended, this album seems like a warning letter. His final days were spent in extreme isolation. He had dental problems, he could barely walk, and the only thing he did actually was painting, writing and playing music, and also heavy substance abuse. And one day he was simply gone and nobody noticed it for a few weeks because he completely cut himself from the outside world. DOA, the third and the final report of Throbbing Gristle. I honestly can't imagine how this sounded in the 70s. Even today, if you're into, let's say, normal music, this sounds just like random noise. Throbbing Gristle treated music like an experiment than anything else. And this whole album consists of random tape noises, hisses, like broken electronics and very other weird stuff. But the reason why I decided to include this particular album is because of the song Hamburger Lady. The track is actually based on a real medical report about a girl who was put into ER, and the doctors in the ER actually described the girl's skin as burnt hamburger meat. Now when you decide to listen to the song, it feels actually so empty and clinical, and there are these constant echoing sirens that are ringing around, and it's just a very confusing song when you listen to it. I definitely can say it's disturbing and unsettling. Again, we are just at layer 1 and things will get progressively disturbing as we dive in, I promise you that. Tool Undertow. If you've never been bothered in life by a Tool fan, you can consider yourself very lucky. I myself, I'm not a huge Tool fan, I love some of the tracks, but we can't deny how influential Tool is. Most people know them for their complexive and long songs, but this album is much more simpler and raw. The newer albums are much more philosophical than this one. But this doesn't make this album look bad. And when you listen to this album, you will have a constant feeling that some pressure is building up and there is a tension that lingers around the whole time. And it does explode, but in a very Tool way where it doesn't go very over the top. And the themes of the album are trauma and disgust, just very human things. And the key song of this album is probably Prison Sex. The song deals directly with cycles of abuse, and it's not artistically hidden or something, it's very blunt and direct. But the heaviness of this album doesn't come from the speed, but rather how relatable and vulnerable it feels. Eminem, the Slim Shady LP. Now, before Eminem became one of the biggest rap stars in the whole world, he was just Slim Shady, a broke white guy who tried to make it work. And we don't need to argue that Slim Shady LP isn't a classic, I think everyone knows that. But in my personal opinion, I think many people forget about how actually dark this album is at certain points. For starters, we have the song Guilty Conscience, where he is battling the duality of good and bad things in various disturbing situations, like in that one where he debated in his head should he take advantage of a 15-year-old girl. Now you can say that these songs are cartoonish and theatrical in some ways of how they were portrayed, and we can debate on that, but a song that really hits hard is Rock Bottom, and it doesn't get more direct than that. He's simply talking about how broke and depressed he is, and simply that he is feeling that every step leads to a wall. And that's why I think that this album deserves to be on this list, because it's portraying Eminem in such a vulnerable state, but we also know that there are many more disturbing songs on his discography, like Kim, for example. Pink Floyd, The Wall. Now I know that many people know about this album, but I don't know how many of you know the real story behind it. Now The Wall follows this fictional character called Pink, who is basically a rockstar musician, and he's slowly over time deteriorating because of all the pressures around him. Now Roger Waters wrote most of the stuff on this album, but the album was more about Syd Barrett, who was actually the original singer of Pink Floyd, who had a real breakdown years earlier. And the band simply watched him how he deteriorates over time. He was cutting connections to them, stopped making any sense, and physically he was there but mentally he wasn't. And Waters over time saw that he has the same problems and saw his story as a warning sign. The key track here is probably Comfortably Numb. Where he talks about the story how Pink doesn't feel any happiness and he needs substances to just feel anything. And that's why this song is so beautiful yet unsettling at the same time. Now let's go to a band from the same time period. The Cure. The Cure started in the late 70s as this post-punk band led by Robert Smith, and over time they became one of the most influential bands out there. Now this album was recorded at a point where the band was completely falling apart. Robert Smith was quite depressed, substance abuse was once again a huge problem, and the simple exhaustion of the constant touring. And he later stated in an interview that at that point in time he had only two options: either to make an album or to end it all. There was no other way out. And so the whole band decided to move into the studio, and they were drinking and getting high constantly while living in a pile of trash, and somehow they recorded this album. Now the album itself doesn't feel aggressive, it's calm and like dreamy, and critics absolutely hated this one, calling it miserable and unlistenable. I mean, it opens up with a quote, "It doesn't matter if we all die," but nobody at the time knew that this was the blueprint for all the goth rock bands that came afterward. But I also need to add that the tensions in the band were so bad that at the end the bassist almost collapsed while recording this album. Type of Negative, A World Coming Down. Because my last video was about Peter Steele, I still can shake the feeling of how disturbing and dark some of the tracks are, even if Type of Negative as a band didn't take themselves very seriously. Their discography is still filled with many dark songs, and World Coming Down I think is the perfect example, and it's perhaps one of their albums where the irony is stripped away and it's completely bleak. The album feels very melodic and structured and very rhythmical, so to say, but the thick bass and the vocals of Peter Steele still give it a very suffocating vibe when you listen to it. And it was recorded at a time where Peter Steele was quite in a dark place. And songs like Everything I Love Dies and White Slavery are just a perfect example. And I think the titles are very self-explanatory this time. And you can really feel the grief and bitterness in their album. And this is also why this album is the perfect transition for the next layer. Now layer 2 is about personal problems and mental collapse. Much like the previous layer, but now it's more aggressive and more bluntly put. And the perfect example is the self-debut album by Korn. Even if nu metal is that one genre where true metalheads look down upon, the impact Korn had on the music scene is undeniable. Now the 90s rock scene had a significant shift where musicians were exploring inner turmoil. Something already seen in the grunge movement, but Korn took it to the extreme. And this time the lyrics were very direct and making you uncomfortable while listening to it, while still being very rhythmical and very groovy, so to say. Now, to truly understand how disturbing this album is, we need to take a look at Jonathan Davis, who grew up as an outsider. He was bullied and he was constantly made feel that he was doing something wrong because of the way he dressed and behaved. And the song Clown is directly about humiliation. Hit me cause I'm strange, tell me I'm pussy and you're harder than me. But the key track isn't Clown, it's definitely Daddy. And there is a good reason why I made a whole video only about this song. Daddy is a song about how Davis talks about how he was essayed as a child. And while they were recording this song, he completely had a mental breakdown and he was crying and sobbing. And at the end, they even decided to put that part into the song itself. And to this very day, Korn doesn't allow to perform this song at all because of the emotional toll it takes on Jonathan Davis. This is heavy because it's simply real. Acid Bed, when the kite string pops. If you ask me to tell you about a very underrated band, I will probably say Acid Bed without blinking twice. They have been buried underground for 20 years, but they're stalling getting recognition lately. And just like Korn, I cover also this story because how depressing it really is, but in the most human way possible. Now the album itself was forged in the swamplands of South Louisiana, where you could only do basically two things: nothing and do. It's a place of poverty, violence and addiction and boredom. And all of that created the sound of Acid Bed. If you didn't know, they're a sludge metal band and their songs are more on the poetic side, so more than others. And if you didn't know, the clown for Slipknot actually said that this band had quite an influence on him. And we can't forget that on the album cover is the painting of John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, something that looks so cheerful and childlike and yet it's deeply unsettling. Now the topics of the albums are about emotional numbness, about suicide and that feeling of rotting inside. Now the spotlight here takes Screams of the Butterfly. On the first listen it's a gorgeous song. It is dreamy, slow and fragile, almost like a lullaby. But then you discover it's about a girl who OD'd on H. And the whole album is constructed in this way. It's not like you wanted to die, but like you were halfway there and you're just getting by. And if you take in consideration that the bassist at the time died with his family in a car crash, made this album even a bit more darker. 9 Inch Nails, The Downward Spiral. Now if you ever looked into the darker side of things, you probably heard about various cults, and one of them is the cult of Charles Manson. And if you somehow don't know about him, he basically convinced a group of hippies to go on a murdering spree and murder very beloved actresses at the time. And with this horrible stunt, Manson actually thought he would spark a race war. Now the reason why this matters is because the album The Downward Spiral is recorded in the same house where the murder happened. Now apparently Trent Reznor said he didn't want to be edgy, that's not the reason why he moved there, but he said he wanted to be completely cut off of the world. like he was already while recording this album. And the topic of the album is in the title itself. It's a downward spiral and emotional decay. And there is a story in this album how he starts to hate himself, spiral into addiction, and at the end he loses all sense of identity. And most people remember the song Closer from this album, but it's a very misunderstood track. Sure, the chorus of the song goes, "I like an animal," but Razor explained it later. It's super negative and super hateful. It's not lust, it's saying I'm worthless. If you want this emptiness, take it. It's more about self-disgust than anything else. And this is the core of this album. It's about disgust, filth, and simply saying that nothing is worth saving anymore. And the whole album is very experimental and industrial sounding, and I think there is no middle ground. You either love this stuff or you hate it, but that's what makes it stand out, I think. Gilles Corey. This is actually a solo project from Dan Barrett, also known from Have a Nice Life, and he wrote this album while suffering underneath quite severe depression and isolation, which is kind of ironic when you think about his other band's name, but this isn't an album you should put on when you try to feel happy. Stands out is how ghostly and haunting the vocals sound, and the whole album gives you that vibe like he is trying to ask if there is any meaning in this life. And a great moment that captures that feeling is Grave Filled with Books. I don't know what anything means. I think I've forgotten how to sleep. I'm not the only one. There is nothing extreme or shocking going on, just like I said, this ghostly sounding, echoing voice with slow melodies that follow him along. It has that lo-fi vibe going on, but it's definitely hard to explain, but it's not a bad album at all. And trust me, this album will leave a mark. Maniac Street Preachers, the Holy Bible. Now here we have the complete opposite from the last entry. Because the Holy Bible is so upbeat and catchy, you wouldn't consider it disturbing at all. But when you start to pay attention to the lyrics, things definitely shift. Now during the writing and the recording of this album, the singer Richie Edwards was dealing with severe anorexia and alcoholism, depression, and harm. And this was to such extreme that he was also performing extreme harm to himself while being on stage. The disturbing part is how nothing is dramatized. He's simply stating how he is feeling. The key track here is 4 Stones 7LB, which is written from inside of an eating disorder. Even if the song is melodically quite mellow, it still is pretty much disturbing about how he is saying he wants to be so light, so thin that he doesn't leave any footprints in the snow. And what's the most disturbing part is that shortly after the album was released, Richie completely vanished. And I think after 15 years when this album was released, he was pronounced dead, but he was never actually found. And listening to these albums, it's almost like you're literally listening to somebody's last words or a last letter to someone. Today is the day. Sadness will prevail. Now I think this is the longest album on this whole Iceberg chart, clocking in 145 minutes. Just for comparison, The Fellowship of the Ring is 178. And this album is practically a full-length emotional breakdown. It took 3 years and 6 months to record, and each track continues into the other one. It's a mix of noise, sludge, and black metal. This project was created by Steve Austin, a musician who is deliberately pushing himself and the listeners to extreme extents. And by the time he made this album, he was suffering from paranoia. What made things even worse, he completely cut himself from outside sources like telephones and things like that. But also, when he was recording this album, he was apparently trapped for 3 months in his house because of a snowstorm. His mental state and this isolation is definitely getting through the album. And if there is a one song I could choose from this album to be a key track, let's say it's Descent. Because it has so frantic repetitions in the beginning, you feel really uncomfortable and claustrophobic at times. But every song on this album follows its own structure, there are no rules here at all. And albums like this are definitely not easily listenable or even inviting. It's more sounding like he wants to hold his sanity together. John Frusciante, Smile from the Streets You Hold. Now John is best known for being a guitarist for the Red Hot Chili Peppers. But this album came from a time where he left the band because of his addiction problems. At the time he was physically and mentally falling apart, the only thing he could think about was drugs. And if you ever decide to listen to this album, you will get a clear understanding why he is the guitarist and not the singer. But sadly in this record you will hear him sing. And honestly, it's so unlistenable, at least in the beginning. I tried it for a few times and I couldn't get through it. And the only reason why this album actually exists, because he needed money for you know what. Can't shape the feeling that he truly was in a dark place, but he still wanted to create something just to make some quick buck. The mastering is also all over the place, and the key track is the first one on the whole album, Enter a Ach. Where he sounds barely conscious as he is screaming so hard that his voice is breaking. Later he was so ashamed of this album, when he got back into Red Hot Chili Peppers he pulled that album out to the record stores. Endless Dismal Moan. Now I already think I said I will do a whole iceberg only about the subgenres of metal, because things are getting quite out of hand lately. But here we have DBM, or depressive black metal. And while black metal itself is already extreme in its own way, DBM goes one step further. Now the first thing I want to get out of the way is that many people somehow think that this is a girl. No, he is a man, and he is called Takuya Tutsusawi? I can't pronounce that. Sorry, but he's a guy. It was a one-man project from Japan which lasted from 2001 to 2009, and his stage name was Chaos 9. Apparently Chaos lived in complete isolation, and he also said he didn't want people to understand the lyrics, and the only thing he wanted people to understand are the moans that he is portraying through his lyrics. And even within black metal this is still considered quite extreme. And his voice isn't sounding like evil or powerful, but more like he said, moaning, but in a way it's barely holding on, like really worn down and exhausted. And that's the exact reason why it's on the list, because the project ended in 2008, the reason being he took his own life when he ended the last album. Which is definitely haunting, but things will get more extreme on the next layer. Layer 3, Shock and Perversity. So the whole layer is structured about albums who are trying to provoke you with disturbing imagery and themes. Some are trying to be as provocative and offensive as possible, while others are blurring the line between obscenity and art. Torso Fuck, Erotic Diarrhea Fantasy. If you're someone who only listens to simple rock music or metal, this can be quite extreme. Now, Torso is a Finnish grindcore band, and this album is one of the purest and repulsive way of how to make music. There is no emotional storytelling here at all. Now, the album itself also features adult film samples, layered with vocals so deep that they hardly can be considered human. They're sounding like a clogged vacuum cleaner. The topic of this album are bodily fluids and activities. And I generally can't understand why people love things like this, but they're apparently having quite a good following behind them. The cover is also a very quite important thing why the album is here, because it's portraying two girls who are completely covered in filth. But when this album cover was introduced on my Iceberg chart about disturbing album covers, I found it very alarming how many people said, finally, Thor on the list. So hey, apparently people love them. The whole sound of the album is also quite heavy, extreme and very fast. Also, if you enjoy the song Africa by Toto, I would recommend you to try an album by Torso Fuck called by Elephants. It's in the same vein. Carcass, a reek of putrefaction. Because I like to do things backwards, let's start with the pioneers of goregrind. Because Carcass also landed on the previous Iceberg chart, it had a very good reason. Because this album tried to push death metal in a completely more and extreme way. And by doing so, they invented goregrind. The production itself on this album is very infamous because it's all very badly mixed together. It's very thick and muddy and all over the place because the band had like few days to record the whole album. And apparently what I read, the audio engineers also messed it up quite badly. And they couldn't fix it before the deadline apparently. Now the lyrics itself about this album are very clinical. It's about decay, flesh, and that's also how the album cover is looking like. It's a collage of different medical photos from, well, dead people and rotting flesh. Ironically, at the time the band was vegan, they were actually trying to show people how disgusting the body was. And incidentally, by trying to do this, they actually spawned a new wave of goregrind bands. Even if many people consider this album completely unlistenable, it still managed to reach the UK indie charts and was famously named by John Speel's favorite album of 1988. Brain Bombs Obey. After hitting you on the previous layer with all that albums about emotional breakdowns, I wanted to give you something cozy this time. I'm just joking, I'm not letting you off the hook that easily. Now, Brain Bombs is a Swedish metal band, and their music has just one goal: to make you feel completely disgusted while listening to it. Now, the riffs on this album are so simple, yet repetitive, and really are trying to get on your nerves. And the lyrics and topics of this album are basically violent fantasies said out loud. Like, there is no poetry here at all. He will directly say, I want to do this, I want to do that. It's like completely blunt. The album cover is also quite infamous because Edgy is on the cover, the guy who made furniture out of human skin. The standout track here is perhaps Obey, which is about dominance and submission. And the disturbing part is how casually he is just talking about those things. He is not even singing. I still don't know if this album is clever or just completely dumb, but in a terrifying way. But if you ever decide to listen to this album, you will be in the head of a person who definitely needs to be on some medication or go out and touch some grass. The Mentors. You asked for it. There is a good reason why the band members are wearing hoodies. It's not because of some theatrical effect, mystery or something like that. It's more like because of all the nonsense they are speaking about or singing about in this case. The whole identity of them is built around being deliberately offensive as much as possible. And I think I needed to include at least one truly shock record that really tries to push everybody's buttons. And now, musically speaking, they aren't something extreme. They're just a typical metal band from the 80s. And the only reason why this album is on this Iceberg is because of the blunt jokes that are so juvenile at sometimes that you truly wonder if they are like kids or I think 40-year-olds. I'm not quite sure. And the vocals of this band are like half shouted, half slurred. And you can always smell the cigarettes, beer, and the body sweat while listening to this record. And the only reason why it's actually here is because it's so offensive against women, and again, we needed some variety, so we needed also one. What just happened? Okay, my light is dying on me, I guess. But we needed at least like one provocative album that is trying to push buttons. That's why it's on the list. Brother Lynch Hung, Season of the Sickness. And finally we have a rap album on our hands. And this time it's a really, really great record. This album is considered one of the foundations of the horror rap genre. It's a subgenre of rap and hip-hop where it's basically the themes of the albums are about paranoia, obsession, and just plain gang violence. And oftentimes these records are very unsettling and violent. And the important part of this record is it's not trying to just be shocking, because it comes from a place of psychological grief and torment. As the album has a backstory where a friend of the rapper is actually killed in the hood, and instead of mourning him, he decided to turn his grief into this album. And what we got is a very cold and numb album that has that West Coast vibes going on. It's not loud or chaotic, but if you love rap and you didn't hear about this album, try it out and you won't be disappointed, trust me. Swans, Children of God. Some say the Children of God is when Swans change his style completely. They went from being aggressive and loud sounding to something much more laid back but still very sinister. The whole album is very slow, aggressive, and very ritualistical. The album is about religion, but not in a church kind of way, but more in like when you have a complete obsession with God, like an unhealthy obsession. The album's tones are like sacred and ominous and truly something else because of it doesn't have any normal singing in there, but it's more like chantings that you will hear in the background. And when you listen to the album, it truly feels like somebody is trying to push God against your forehead without your consent, in a very passive-aggressive way. Necro, I Need Drugs. The rapper Necro actually started his career in a death metal band, and he drew his name from a song from Slayer called Necrophilic. That's why he's called Necro. But this album is a rap record. And the topics are simply all the things he saw while growing up in Brooklyn. He wasn't trying to shock people with its topics, but more like to show what's really going on around them. The key track of this album is definitely I Need Drugs, which is actually a remake of the song LA Cool J's I Need Love. But this time it isn't about love, but it's about addiction. And how I found this record was actually when I was covering disturbing music videos, and I Need Drugs is a music video actually about how Necro is filming his uncle and his friend who are doing various substances while being recorded, and Necro was just singing in the background. The song itself is very melodic and very like dreamy like, and it's a complete contrast to the things he's singing about. Please be aware, this isn't some shock basement project by one solo guy. This is actually a quite good record if you want to listen to it. And the disturbing part of this album is just how Necro is just trying to show his everyday life. Warmflang, Tomb of the Ancient King. Now Warmflang is a Finnish funeral doom project, which has a nearly mythical status in the underground scene, and with a very good reason. Tomb of the Ancient King was released in 2006 and they only have this one full-length album. And the reason why this album is actually on the list is because you won't find anything more oppressive than this. It's truly magnificent. And what I mean by that is that the music is very slow, yet soaked in drenched. And the vocals are also your not typical metal vocals you will expect. And in my opinion, the vocals sound like Balrog. They are so deep and so animalistic. It almost feels you are trapped in Moria and here is just somewhere coming to get you. There is no like drastic shift in momentum in the album, and there is just this constant dark and very heavy atmosphere that is going on. Now, why do I think that this album deserves to be on the list? It's simply because it feels like a funeral march, right? Like you're walking in certain death. That's how this album is sounding like. I dig this album so much and even landed on my playlist. Pig Destroyer Natasha. Now, Pig Destroyer is the cornerstone of grindcore, if I'm correct. And like the previous entry, it's a very slow track that truly drags itself and it doesn't explode immediately. And there is again that suffocating heaviness that is in the tracks because of its textures and the sounds of the deep tuned guitars and just the ambient noises. The genre this time is this mix of sludge and doom metal, which is portrayed or mixed together in one story. It's not an uncomfortable track because Pig Destroyer really nails how to control the whole situation, how the whole sound is like portrayed and how it's going on over the time. And obviously the story is what makes this album truly stand out. It's a boy who is obsessed with a girl, both of them were 17, and he was obsessed to this point that he simply snapped and decided to the girl. And over time, as you're listening to the song, you will see how he's emotionally breaking down and simply spiraling down, and things get more intense as we go to the end of the song, or album in this case. And the last part of the song is basically him like being completely consumed by this guilt of what he did. Again, it's not dramatic or fast or too explosive, it has that continuous vibe going on and I really dig it. And it really feels like you're stuck in a nightmare. Now their tongues, all the dread magnificence of perversity. Now I wanted to continue with this liminal dread which was portrayed somewhat in the last two entries, and this album perfectly fits in that space, but in a complete other direction, because it's something so much more corrupt. This was a solo project from a Dutch guy called Maurice de Jong, aka Morris, who blends black metal, industrial noise and dark ambient into this mess of an album which is almost sounded like a snuff tape. It's very bleak and you're feeling like this whole thing is played out in a basement. It's not because of the quality of the album, but because of the vibe. It's very mechanical, raw and deeply unsettling with vocals that shift from that sub-growl noise to high-pitched screams you were expecting to see when somebody's basically But again, it doesn't rely on gore or horror cliches. It's very abstract, but in a very calculated way. Sandhill Septicemesis. When it comes to sheer atmosphere, Septicemesis definitely blows everyone out of the water, at least speaking in their own unique way. Sandhill is a US black metal project which is heavily influenced by funeral and doom metal, and there is almost no information about them like their lineup or interviews or something. I only know that the album was recorded in 2007, and honestly don't know who are the people who listen to albums like this. But what sets this record apart is definitely the vocals. These aren't your typical screams you would expect from a black metal project, but they're more sounding like somebody who is trying to physically hurt himself, like you can really hear him that he's pushing his boundaries and that his voice is shattering. And how this album has this mix of gasping and choking really sets it apart from anything we had until this point. And it sounds completely feral in my opinion. And the whole thing feels so filthy and liminal and like you're stumbled upon. It's basically, if you know about the movie Begotten, this is the soundtrack to it. This is how this album sounds like. And there are also some rumors floating around, and after the band finished this project, they actually killed themselves and soaked the physical copies of the CDs in their blood and sent it to their customers. I don't know how this happened, I don't know if this is real, but those are just some of the things I read online. I can't prove any of this and I don't know if I want to believe it. The George, Tokyo Dynamite. Now this entry barely classifies as an album in my opinion, and as this album is pure chaos in rapid fire form. And I feel that we have so many entries trying to push some boundaries because this album contains 75 tracks in under 40 minutes. So most of them are just like a few seconds long. And what do they sound like? Well, basically just screaming, distortion, yelling, and combined with some body noises, if you know what I mean. And it sounds like a wild boar was trapped in a studio and just went nuts. There is no structure here at all, and it's so frantic, it's unhinged. This George guy, or however you pronounce that name, is a project group from Japan, and they are known for pushing boundaries. They had even on concerts like a guy beating his meat, and that's like a performance. And this audio definitely captures that spirit. It's like human noises, bodily fluids, distortions, that all just of them like piled on top of each other. And that's exactly why it's disturbing. This isn't art, this isn't music, this is anti-music. And I know there are many stuff like this out there, but we need at least one of them to be on the list, don't you think? And it's completely unlistenable. That's why it's disturbing, I think. Condom, how welcome is that? And I think this marks the perfect shift for the next layer, because it will prepare us for the truly dark and disturbing stuff that will push boundaries. While the previous album sounded like snuff tapes, like funeral marches and what have you, this one completely blurs the line between art and reality in a very hard to justify way. And that's the reason why it's on the list, because Condom, short for Control Domination, is a British power electric project led by Mark Dando, known for his projects in electrical music and for themes of violence, control and suffering. Now, but this album is far more intimate and morally disturbing. The album uses real, unedited recordings of his mother in her final days of her life. You will hear her like breathing, mumbling and deteriorating in real time. And there is like no performance here. You're just listening to someone who is slowly dying. Accompanied with very minimal sounds in the background. Now, how ethical this album is, or should it have been done in the first place, is something I can't answer, but it definitely faces you with your own morality while listening to it. And this can be something you listen to feel better in any way or to find any enjoyment. And it's a small album you just endure and go through. But it sets perfectly stage for the next layer, where the topic is just about that. And before we dive into the next layer, I just want to say, please consider subscribing to this channel. This isn't some AI content farm that pushes content down your throat. It's just me, just one guy trying to make the best videos he can. And if you're still watching, I hope that means that you're getting something out of it. Lately, YouTube is truly pushing me to the curb. And for all of you who are showing up in every single video, commenting and sharing your thoughts, I see you and I appreciate your support. I love you guys. Now, I don't want to drag this any longer. Let's go to layer 4. This layer is about where music completely breaks away from any structure or form. And these aren't albums in any traditional sense, because these are real samples from confessions, recordings, cool gatherings and many more other disturbing things. You will see, that's why viewer discretion is advised, because things will get unhinged on this layer. Sounds of America Doomsday Cult Volume 14. Now this isn't the album in any traditional sense, like I said. These are actually live recordings from Church Universal and Triumphant, or CTU for short. It's a new age doomsday cult which was based in Montana. And this album is basically a recording of their preacher called Elizabeth Clare Prophet. And while listening to this record, you will immediately find how Elizabeth is talking and preaching in a very weird and funny way. It's like hard to explain. You will probably laugh your ass off while listening to it.
In the name I am that I am, Sanat Kumara.
I ask you to close your eyes, to kneel if you would like to kneel.
Here our golden answer, here our golden answer, here our golden answer in this hour.
And as you listen to the prophet Elizabeth, you will actually hear how she is sounding very rhythmical, and it's sounding very funny actually. But what makes it disturbing is that this isn't some random nonsense. This was a real preacher who had over thousands of followers, who was declaring U2, Elton John and Michael Jackson as the devil's spawn, and your kids shouldn't be looking at cartoons like Scooby-Doo because they are bad. And then when you start to think about it, you're not just listening to an album, you're basically listening to a preacher brainwashing their followers.
And the movie Ghostbusters, and all other individual groups or individual artists who vibrate in consonance with them, and with the vibration of the fallen angels and the demons of death and hell from out the bottomless pit.
And she was strictly against rock music, cartoons, and any form of pop culture, because this is all part of this spiritual war. And she told her followers that the only path to salvation was to follow her blindly. And this is what makes this album truly disturbing. It's basically real propaganda. I mean, people gave their entirely livelihoods to this cult, and the kids were also locked up there from the rest of the world. They didn't go to the school or have any TV or something like that. It's truly disturbing when you start to think about it a little bit more. So I hope you understand why is this on the list, but this is the tamest entry on this layer. Silence, and then she bled. Okay, normally a band like Silence should be perhaps on layer 1 or layer 2, but there is a good reason why I included this album so deep on the list. It's only because one track. And if you're any fan of deathcore, you probably know about the song And Then She Bled. This is the only reason why this album is so low at this point. It's not a typical song, but it's definitely much more constructed than anything we have seen for a while, but it doesn't have any vocals and it revolves around a 911 call. Now, I made a whole video about that, but YouTube doesn't like things where animals are involved, so I will keep this very vague. But if you know about Travis the chimp, this is his story, because Travis the chimp actually attacked the owner's friend, and the whole song is structured about this 911 call, how she's calling them, explaining what's happening and what he's doing to her friend. Unsettling call without the music, but the music makes it even more dramatic. Now, is this exploitation of this event is another can of worms? I mean, it's completely nuts and nerve-wracking, and if you want to see the full deep dive, again, the video is here, check it out and you will hear the full story about it. But it's quite extreme, be warned. Brian Louis Saunders, The Confessor. I really didn't know if I should include this or not because it's not disturbing, but it's very weird in a hard to pinpoint down way. The Confessor is an album about Brian being at his most vulnerable and unstable place he has been in years. Now, for context, Saunders is a performer artist who loves to push himself very far just to produce music. This includes sleep deprivation and being on various substances and recording himself while being on them to make those albums. And this one is constructed like a tape with ambient noises in the background. And what are you actually listening to is Brian having a mental breakdown in his closet, I think. Now again, he has a whole bunch of these albums where he is in very different states, and he actually said because he used so many and so different substance abuse, he has some mental problems like real brain damage because of it. And that's why after all I decided to include it, because of the lengths he went just to produce this album is quite nuts. Stalag. Project Stalag. So Stalag is a noise-drone ambient project from Germany. And once again our ears are completely assaulted by the harsh noises they produce, by the distorted electronics, synths and industrial textures. But there is also a very good reason why this particular album is on the list so far, and it's because there included real psychiatric patients screaming while having mental breakdowns. So you're not hearing any performances, but you're literally listening to people having mental breakdowns and being in the lowest parts of their lives. And just hearing somebody screaming like that without context of you knowing what's going on and putting this project with these noises that truly are abrasive, it's disturbing and unsettling. And also the band's name is a reference to a German camp. Reverend Jim Jones, The Last Supper. Much like the first entry, now we have Jim Jones, and we probably all knew who he is. But if you somehow don't know about him, he was a priester who basically built a cult. Now Jim Jones was the cult leader of the People's Temple in Jonestown. And he was solely responsible for the Jonestown massacre, where over 900 people drank Kool-Aid to take their lives, and if I'm correct, this included over 240 children. And this album was actually recorded just a few days or hours before that event. And there isn't any music here, it's just listening to Jim Jones' prayers and preaches, and it feels so wrong, I can't even explain.
We lay down our lives in protest against what's being done. So we lay down our lives to protest against what's being done. The criminality of people.
And I mean, you're listening to these tapes and can't believe that people actually followed him, but he was definitely charismatic, and you're trapped into this cycle where the people all around you are just praying to him, and you're cut off of them. You don't know what's happening outside of the community, and you're forbidden to know anything about what's happening outside the community, and you're just blindly following everybody. And when Jim Jones decided you need salvation, you decide to follow him to the end. And I can't emphasize enough how disturbing this is actually. I know we said we are going to talk about the most disturbing albums out there, but this is disturbing. And while he was doing those preaches, you will hear people like clapping, cheering him, and it's just so abstract, so surreal to think that he had so much power over people, that they were so blindly following him and not questioning the things he said or did. But the next one is truly nerve-wracking. Peter Soto's Buyer's Market. We started this iceberg with some more familiar names in the music scene, like Korn, 9 Inch Nails, perhaps Acid Bath, but this project or album, it is an album, it's produced like an album, but I don't understand. I simply don't understand why would somebody make something like this. Even if it's considered an album, I can't call it so in any way. And I tried to listen to it, but I couldn't. I walked away a few times. I came back. I still couldn't listen to it. It was so... I tried for every album on the list to sit down, listen to it, to give you a general feel about how it's sounding and how the vibe is and everything, but with this one, it completely broke me. So Buyer's Market is an album made up from slices of recordings, which are actually testimonies. Now these testimonies are from girls or young children who have been essayed. And listening to them, I don't know, it's so hard to listen. Like they were asking them questions and they were trying to answer them, and they didn't know what was happening, what were the things that were done to them. I don't understand why would somebody make something like this, compile it and release it. is so surreal and so unhinged to me that I don't understand it. And I truly think that this is one of the most disturbing albums out there. And yet this degenerate Peter Sotos, the man behind this whole project or whatever you call it, he is continually gaining support in that part of the community from people who are calling this somewhat of an art. He has even written books about it, like in the first person, like portrayed as a predator, adopting this predator mindset. And this even led that people were inspired by this. So this entry is like 2 in 1, because Dirge, the Peter Sotos Files by Martin Blood, is a very extreme example, because he actually compiled all of his best work into one or something like that. Like, I just read about it, I didn't want to listen to it because I couldn't. I simply couldn't make myself. It was too disturbing for me, and I don't know what to say else. And now I have another question for you guys. Now I really don't care what my viewers look like, and I try to spend a lot of time to provide the content I do. And lately my videos aren't getting the interaction, and I don't care. There are people still who care about my content and they comment and everything, but can you explain me why a video, audio recordings like this album does have 250,000 views on YouTube? I mean, when you really think about it, who are the people who are trying to seek this content out and listen to them? Because we had some albums on this Iceberg which were interesting, like experimental. They were not bad, they were just perhaps weird, and some of them had like 1,000 views, 2,000 views, completely buried in the algorithm. And then you have something like this with so much views and exposure. And I don't know, and I think that YouTube needs to do some explanation, but let's go to the last layer. Nicole 12, the entire project. So let's open layer 6 with Nicole 12. Even if I think that perhaps the last entry was more disturbing than this one is disturbing in a completely other way. While the last entry were compiled audio recordings, this one is some edgy noise project created by a guy known as Mikko Aspa. He's a Finnish noise artist who is heavily involved in the power electronic scene. If you already heard about him, you probably know how controversial he is, because he's deliberately trying to push the line between art and exploitation. His project started in 1998, and he quickly built a reputation for being one of the most disturbing artists in that genre. Now, because this whole project is built around power dynamics, exploitation, and predatory behavior, and it's mostly told from the predator side. There is nothing symbolic here, no metaphors, it's direct and blunt. Again, because it's a noise project, it's wrapped in these electronics, creepy samples, and childlike voices that would also like creep in and out, paired with some very disturbing monologues. It's very hard to describe what's going on, and it's once again a record that I didn't listen fully through because I couldn't make myself. But I talked about it a few times on my channel with a very good reason, and that's why it's on this list so deep down. And the worst part is that after covering this, some of you decided to look up this thing and even left a comment with mentioning me. And for those innocent minds, please don't go there. You won't find anything interesting, trust me. This project is straight up disgusting. And like with the last entry, I don't know why people make stuff like this and who is the target audience. I mean, I'm guessing who is the target audience. But White Axum, the YouTuber, he debated that this is perhaps for therapeutic purposes, so those monsters would stop at their desires and won't go any further. But man, I want to agree with this, but I don't know. And before we go to the last entry, I also want to thank him, because a good part of this iceberg was based on his iceberg chart, but I decided to tweak it a little bit. But the inspiration definitely came from his iceberg. So thank you, man. Zenjin, Pseudo Scorpion. Now, I didn't listen to this album, I don't want to find this album and I hope it doesn't exist. If you've been on the internet for a while and try to discover like the darker side of music, you probably heard about this one. This is like an urban legend, like a creepypasta flowing around, and I really hope that it's only a myth. So what is this Zenjin Pseudo Scorpion? Now this should be an album, also noise project or something like that, that is now completely built not with testimonies from children, but from, well, you know what, with real screams. That's apparently the concept of this album, and it's sold to very depraved souls apparently. Again, I can't confirm if this album is even real, and I don't want to listen to it, and I hope it doesn't exist. And Zenjin Pseudo Scorpion marks the end of this video. Now, if you didn't get your iceberg fix yet, I have a playlist with over 25 icebergs, so you can watch that. I'm going to drink my coffee. I have two sips left. Going to put some vinyl on, and this one is looking at me, and I'm going to zone out. Then I'm going to prepare this video for this weekend, and by the time this video is live, I hope I am joining Triglove on their concert in Wien, and I hope you enjoy this one. If you have suggestions for more disturbing albums, leave them down below. If you want to see other iceberg covered, you can also comment down below. I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave it a like, also a comment. Consider subscribing to see more videos like this. I know we never did something like this on my channel, but I truly hate this AI stuff that is completely consuming the YouTube algorithm, so I want to be a little bit different, and now showing it in front of the camera is being different, I guess. That's all from me now, guys. Love you so much for the support lately, and see you in the next one. Snorky, bye, ciao.